Welcome to Kosher Australia webinar series. We are broadcasting to you live from the Kosher Australia offices here in North Caulfield section of Victoria, Australia. Today I have a very special guest. Just before we get to the guest, I'd like to inform the public that our new Kosher Australia food guide has just come into the office. Please, if you would like a copy, details to follow about registration, you can always email or call the office and we will direct you appropriately. Today we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Kasriel Oliver. Thank you for joining us. He is our Chief Chemist. He's been working at Kosher Australia for over 3 decades, 36 years to be exact. That's a lot of experience. Plus high. That's right. So it's a big honor to have Mr. Oliver here with us today. And let's get started. So, Mr. Oliver, what is your official role at Kosher Australia?
I'm the Chief Chemist at Kosher Australia, and I do auditing of the food manufacturers to ascertain whether we can give kosher certification. Also, I recommend the conditions under which the kosher certification is likely to be viable. And also with regard to the ingredients that Kosher Australia would accept without a kosher certificate, or the ingredients that would be recommended that they must have a kosher certificate. I also have been involved in ascertaining which ingredients are under which category of requiring a kosher certificate or not.
Just to explain a little bit to some of our viewers, there are different groupings of ingredients. So what we call group 1, that refers to a type of ingredient. It really does not require any kosher supervision. We call that inherently kosher. For example, flour, that's correct, sugar, certain products like that don't really need certification. Now things can get very complicated. So Kasriel over here is involved in determining which products we'll say don't need any certification because there really are not any conscious concerns, and which ones we have to actually investigate. Fascinating stuff.
Right, but concerning the audits of the finished products, I would recommend often the best pathway to achieve kosher certification. And on the other hand, I'll put up red flags when there are certain worries and concerns that the ultimate kosher certification may not be viable.
Very nice. Now, to be a chief chemist in that list of what Kasriel does for us here in Kosher Australia sounds quite complicated, and I'm sure you have had some training, education to help you be competent in this role. Can you please share with us what your background, your educational background is?
Well, besides Shibgurela education in the Shibgurela in Melbourne, I've had extensive studies of chemistry. I've got a Bachelor of Applied Science with a double major in chemistry. And also I've been trained very ably and very inspiringly many years ago in the 80s by 2 very great people, Dr. Oliver, who was the chief chemist or chief honorary chemist actually at that time for decades before I started. And he trained me using the wealth of his experience. And also I was trained by Rabbi Moshe Schreck, who was the then kosher supervising rabbi, who was also very, very inspiring for me, both in my kashrus work and for me also just in my observance of Yiddishkeit.
Let me interject for 1 second. I think Rabbi Moshe was a Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim.
Yes, he was a Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim who learned in the Yeshiva in Radin, and was also related to the Chafetz Chaim.
Wow, quite impressive.
Also, I've studied through all the kashrus laws in Yerodea in the part of Shulchan Aruch which deals with the kosher laws, and have been through several times Melicha, Basar B'Cholov, and Taruvas, and I have regular study sessions still and keep up my learning in these kashrus laws.
Quite extensive background, I see. Very nice. Okay, so we're going to get to our topic for today. Our topic is, how has the kosher market in Australia changed over the decades? And we'll be drawing on Mr. Oliver's decades of experience in the field to try to give us a better idea of how things work today and how they worked years ago. Now, decades ago, people, the prevailing custom, or it was maybe a common custom amongst kosher consumers, was to go to the store, pick up a product in their hand, turn it around, look at the ingredients, and if the ingredients, there was no pork and there was no let's say grape juice or anything like that on the label, they would assume that whatever the product was in fact kosher. Was that an acceptable practice, let's say 30 years ago, and is that one today?
Well, that practice was hopefully not used 30 years ago, because the first, it was called then the Mizrahi Kosher Fest, came out in 1975, even before I started, which was the end of 79. So hopefully all kosher consumers, if they wanted to really and truly keep kosher, used the Mizrahi Kosher List, whose name was changed later on to the Mizrahi Kosher Food Bulletin, and changed later on again to the Kosher Australia Food Bulletin, now the Kosher Australia Food Guide. So perhaps before 1975, I also heard that people were just checking labels to see if there are any, let's say, non-kosher looking ingredients. But that was a practice that even in the 70s and the 80s were certainly not recommended, definitely not, because there are many ingredients which may be called ingredients, but for the terms of Australian food laws are not considered ingredients. They're what's called processing aids. That means they don't add any nutrition to the product, such as a certain type of vegetable, could be animal fat, added to jams to decrease the frothing and the bubbling of the jams when you're boiling it. That doesn't have to be listed on the ingredients list. That's a processing aid, and there are other processing aids as well that are not considered ingredients. I remember I was at a factory going back some time ago, and they gave me the list of ingredients in the office, and then when I went around, I found another ingredient that wasn't on the list. So I said to them, "Oh, what's this? It's not in the list." They said, "Oh, that's not an ingredient." I said, "Well, it looks like an ingredient to me. It's in a drum and it's got a name on it." And I said, "Is it used in product?" They said, "Yes," but they said it's a processing aid. So many times on the list of ingredients, because of Australian food law, certain raw materials don't have to be listed. The other problem is, besides that many of the ingredients that are listed in such a way that the untrained person wouldn't know that they're suspect. For example, flavoring can contain many, many different ingredients, some even 50, even more different ingredients in just one product called flavoring, listed quite correctly on the label as flavoring, but it contains many different ingredients, some which may not be kosher. In fact, I was at a factory some years ago where they were putting the word flavoring on the label. I remember it was a pickle factory, and they were adding flavoring, which was not just a mixture of ingredients that may contain a non-kosher ingredient. It was literally chicken powder, and they were calling on the list of ingredients flavoring. So certainly even years ago, for all these reasons, it would not have been okay to just rely on looking at the label in order to work out if the product is kosher or not.
And I guess all the more so today, where things have gotten much more complicated. Sure, I guess it's not an approach that's acceptable.
Sure, definitely.
Interesting. So one of your fields of expertise is ingredient research. Now I'm sure you have, as you mentioned, a flavor can have 50 different components to it. If you can share with us maybe a certain type of a chemical or an ingredient that's particularly complicated, and how you go about researching to make sure there are actually no kashrus concerns.
Yeah, well, let's firstly start a little bit on a more basic level as far as ingredients are concerned. Now you're asking me about ingredients. Ingredients can be divided, I would say, into two different types or two different levels of ingredients. One level is a single component ingredient, whereas ingredient is literally just one ingredient, such as salt, sugar, or a common preservative such as potassium sorbate, or glycerin, or gelatin. They're all single component ingredients. The other type of ingredients are multiple component ingredients, where it's considered as an ingredient containing many different components within the ingredient. Now, talking about ascertaining the kashrus of ingredients, With the single component ingredients, it's important to ascertain their kosherous not only for themselves as to whether they require a kosher certificate or whether they're okay as is, but also for the sake of the multiple component ingredients, because for each of those, we need to know whether each component within them, each ingredient within each sub-ingredient within the ingredient needs a kosher certificate or not. So common ingredients that don't require a kosher certificate are such as salt or sugar or potassium sorbate or certain kinds of spices, don't require any particular kosher certificate or kosherous authorization. In the kosherous world, we call them Group 1 ingredients. Other types of ingredients, which are also single component ingredients, do require a kosher certificate or at least further research to ensure that they're kosher. In certain cases, that kosher certificate can be what we call a blanket certificate. That means everything that the company makes is kosher of that particular ingredient, or there may need to be special batches made where it just can't be assured to us that all the production is going to be kosher, like a special batch, generally with a mashgiach, with a supervisor, to make sure everything is okay. One of the most important things is to ascertain whether the single component ingredient needs a kosher certificate and further work, or whether it's okay as is. Two examples of raw materials, ingredients that need a kosher certificate are flavorings and glycerine. I'll just focus on them for a moment because we're trying to work out here some understanding of the history of Kosher Australia. When it comes to vegetable oil, in the, let's say, decades ago, that's an example of a single component ingredient, is vegetable oil. We did not have any manufacturers in Australia that were dedicated to vegetable oil. So what we did was we employed a certain leniency, which was according to Shulchan Aruch, that vegetable oil can be used as a flush, as a kashering. It's called the Hebrew Sha'ar Mashkin, which there was no other choice at that time. And the post-game decided that that would be acceptable. And the finished product, vegetable oil, was considered acceptable and approved, though not actually kosher certified.
So we're talking about equipment that use, let's say, tallow, non-kosher oil.
Yes.
So that, and at high temperatures. So you have to get rid of those blias, that absorption of non-kosher. So they would use the vegetable oil itself, the kosher. That would not be marked as kosher. And the next one would be marked as kosher.
Interesting, you said the flush not marked as kosher. We have to ensure that that wouldn't get into any of our kosher products as an ingredient. So I would have to find out and ascertain exactly where that flush oil would go to. Generally would go to pet food or would go to a biscuit manufacturer that wasn't kosher. But in more recent times, actually since the late 90s, we've had one vegetable manufacturer that's dedicated to vegetable oil, and further vegetable oil manufacturers in recent times that dedicate to vegetable oil, such that we can give an actual kosher certificate on the finished product, because there's no tallow, no animal fats in the whole process in the entire factory. The other product that has also an interesting history is glycerine, which is also a single component ingredient. Back in the 80s, glycerine, which is a common food ingredient, was sourced actually for Australian use within Australia, and most of that was from animal byproduct. But there was also some vegetable glycerine coming in from Malaysia. The palm oil industry was starting then. So crude glycerine was coming in from Malaysia, sometimes from Indonesia, and that was in the beginning only certified or verified as vegetable origin, but no actual kosher certificate on the glycerine. And then I used to go to Port Melbourne, to the factory where it was refined. And at that factory, where they also refined animal glycerin, I would ensure that the vegetable glycerin had the appropriate separation and koshering procedures. And then that finished product, in the beginning, we consider as approved if the feedstock vegetable glycerin from Malaysia was not actually kosher certified, but afterwards we kosher certified the finished Australian refined kosher glycerin product when the original feedstock coming from Malaysia was actually kosher certified. Now get on to multiple component
Just a quick question, sorry.
Yeah.
So today we have fully dedicated vegetable oil facilities where we need not rely on that leniency of using shamash.
Yes, absolutely.
That's one improvement that we've had here in Australia in the past couple of decades.
Yes, that's definitely an amazing advantage that we have several vegetable oil manufacturers, including the largest one that is dedicated to vegetable oil. And the other advantage is with regard to glycerin, there's plenty of kosher certified glycerin coming from Southeast Asia, and we don't have to do our own work here in Australia to check on the kosherous. It comes mostly with you're okay from Southeast Asia. Now getting on to multiple component ingredients. So the first thing we need to do is to get the bill of materials, or you could call it the recipe, from the manufacturer, and that would list all the various single component ingredients, or in certain cases there would be multiple component ingredients also in the recipe. We'll get to that in a little while. And then we would have to ascertain whether each ingredient within the multiple component ingredient needs a kosher certificate or not. The other thing we need to do with the multiple component ingredients, such as flavorings, for example, it contains many different ingredients, or liquid colorings also contain many different ingredients. The other thing we'd have to do is look into the process to see how these products are made and whether the equipment usage is also used for non-kosher products, whether it's made hot, and whether koshering is necessary, whether the standard cleaning is good enough for the koshering.
Okay, very interesting. Now, this might be a hard question, but how many ingredients would you say that you've researched in your time here? Can you give us a ballpark estimate? Thousands?
Would be thousands. Yeah,
thousands.
Definitely would be thousands.
Maybe coming close to 10,000, maybe?
Perhaps, yeah.
Perhaps.
I haven't counted them up, but
okay.
I'm busy doing the work.
Of all the ingredients that you have investigated, can you please share with us what you feel is the hardest ingredient to get down to the end to make sure it's kosher, and why that is that it was so hard?
Hardest ingredient probably is flavoring that contains sub-flavorings within it, and within that kind of ingredient, then the sub-flavorings are supplied by that same company itself, and that can be the most difficult exercise to ensure and ascertain that the finished product flavoring is kosher. I'll explain to you why. With the flavorings, as I said before, there are many different ingredients within the flavoring, but when there are sub-flavorings, then we have to make sure that they're kosher and they can be supplied internally within the company. Just by the way, the sub-flavorings may also be supplied by other flavor houses, even by the competition flavoring companies. And then in that case, they just have to have a kosher certificate from whoever is supervising the competition flavor company, where they're getting those sub-flavoring from. But when the sub-flavoring is supplied internally, called internal product, in other words, it's a flavoring made just for internal use, then it can get much more different, much more complex, because the sub-flavoring can be supplied from different parts of the factory or even other branches of the same company. So I may be going to, they may call it plant one within that factory, and that plant one would be manufacturing flavorings as a blend of different ingredients at ambient temperature, that is at room temperature. But the sub-flavorings could be made by the same company at another part of the factory by hot process, such as extraction, distillation, and other means of hot processes. Even a cold process may need a specific type of koshering. When a product is extracted, sometimes extracted cold, and if it's left for more than 24 hours, it comes under the halachic category of kadosh, which means that it also needs a koshering just as if it would be extracted in a hot process. So then the other parts of the factory, where the internal products are sourced from, or the other branches of the factory in a different location, would have to be checked to ensure that, firstly, all the ingredients, of course, are kosher certified if they're not kosher as is, but also to ensure whether any special koshering is necessary or whether standard process of cleaning is okay. So in an extraction process and in distillation, it's all done hot, and there can be a lot of other ingredients going through there that the company's not even interested in that would become kosher. So we have to get the total inventory of all the raw materials going through there. There can also be a process called spray drying, where the company is producing their powder ingredients, their dry ingredients, from the original liquid. So they're extracting the product from original, let's say, for example, plant material. They're getting which is a hot process, or distilling it, product from that. Then they can go into a spray dryer from which they're making the powder product, and then blending it with other powders that they may be producing themselves and maybe buying. And that spray dryer works at a very hot level, and the koshering of that can be very, very complex, and also often needs a batch supervision. So you can see that where there are sub-flavorings and internal products supplied by the same company, it can be a much more complicated process. And you know what? When it comes to the factory in the beginning, they may say, oh yes, our process is very simple. We just do an ambient blending of liquids or ambient blending of dry powders at room temperature. So the untrained person may think, oh well, must be all right. No koshering necessary. But when you look through the bill of materials, the recipe, and we see that there are sub-flavorings, and then we have to ask where they're made, then we see that there are a lot of complexities to do with the other parts of the factory, and ensuring that the other parts of the factory are kosher as far as ingredients and koshering if necessary is concerned.
Well, that's quite complicated. You know, the average consumer walks down the aisles, the shopping of the store, supermarket, and he picks up a strawberry ice cream or a cookie, whatever it is, and people don't realize the amount of time and effort and the complexity that goes into and that it surrounds all these products. So it's fascinating, unbelievable. Okay, now can you share with us, over your decades of experience, your most surprising find? Out of the blue, all of a sudden you found something that was you never would have expected would be there.
Even I never would have expected. I remember it was actually some decades ago when I was investigating a stewed prunes product, stewed prunes in sugar syrup. And everything was going okay in the sense of the ingredients. Actually, it was quite a simple process. But then when I asked what else is the equipment used for, they talked to me how they're doing cooked octopus in the same equipment. So after going there, I very quickly thought that there are going to be a lot of people who may think that stewed prunes are okay. It was going back in the times when there were some people who just made assumptions. So went to the nearest phone booth. Those days there were no mobile phones and not even faxes. And I remember that because I left my notebook in the phone booth. Went back to it afterwards. I was sent out a very quick note: don't use those stewed prunes. And also at a manufacturer, this is not to do with retail product, to do with bulk ingredients. I was at a manufacturer where they had a plant within a factory, but that plant was called the fruit juice extraction plant. And they had many different types of fruit juice there and extracts, and everything was going fine until I looked through all the list of the other products that they make there that they're not interested in having our kosher certification on. Other products they make for other companies that they weren't asking for a kosher certificate. And one of them was cuttlefish, which is a certain type of marine animal that they were using the same extraction equipment that they used to extract flavorings from juices and from fruit. That same extraction equipment was used to extract cuttlefish. Well, I certainly made sure that that would go to another branch of the same company, which did not have any hechsher, and so it went over there, and then we started on seeing if we can give the produce extracts a hechsher.
Very interesting. So basically, you never know what you might find lurking behind the corner
Absolutely.
of any of these factories. Always have to be, I guess, communication sounds like it's essential,
Sure.
and being alert. What we call it pikchus, which means street smarts, just being able to assess a factory in a smart way.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, our last question is: what has been the biggest change in the food chemistry industry over the past few decades? Single biggest change.
Probably the biggest change, especially as it affects kashrus, is the fact that each raw material, each ingredient or processing aid must have a raw material code, and that's computer generated. I remember going back some decades ago, I would go to a manufacturer and they would have a pail of apricot flavoring, another pail of apricot flavoring, and with a texter they would write the so-called raw material code, and it would have the same one. Each apricot flavoring, one from supplied by one company, one supplied by another company, wouldn't have had exactly an identical taste, would still have the same raw material code. And even if they had different raw material codes, that didn't help so much, because an operator, those times, was relying on the name of the product. So look at the list and say apricot flavoring, they choose the apricot flavoring. Now, it's quite easy to choose the wrong apricot flavoring, even they might say the supplier and the other one's got a different supplier, but it was fairly easy to make a mistake, and we were very concerned if a company would have a kosher and a non-kosher grade of the same ingredient. But in more recent times, with computer-generated raw material codes, the operator goes mainly according to the raw material code rather than the name. So it looks at the raw material code, it could be, for example, a 7-digit code, and then it will call up that ingredient. Usually it will be prepared the day before on a pallet. And when that ingredient gets called up with that unique raw material code, if the operator would put in a different raw material code, an alert, an alarm would be sounded, and he wouldn't be able to, even if he wanted to, be able to use that product. Now, the manufacturers use this computer system originally for their own needs, not specifically for kashrus. Take, for example, citric acid, which is a common food ingredient. Citric acid can be supplied in a regular form, in what's called an anhydrous form. It can have certain particle sizes, larger particle size, smaller particle size. Citric acid can be supplied in solution. So it can be 50% solution, 20% solution. There are many different grades. One company could be using 5 or 6 or many different grades of citric acid. Similarly with natural coloring such as beta-carotene. Beta-carotene, oil-soluble, aqueous soluble, or dry beta-carotene, they will still be called beta-carotene. But with the advent of the raw material codes and the alert sound and the alarm, if the operator would use the wrong one, so this is absolutely fantastic for situations where manufacturers have different versions and different grades of the same ingredients, because then we don't have to worry that they'll use a different one. Once we have the bill of materials, the list of the raw materials that goes into the product and the raw material code, then we know the exact grade, the exact version they'll be using, and then the kosher grade will have a specific raw material code that may cover several of grades of the product. Different particle size of citric acid, going back to that example, may all be kosher. So each of those raw material codes would be accepted. But if there's a raw material code that's for a non-kosher product, we will ensure that that is not on the list of the raw materials for the product that we're giving hechsher on. So this advent of raw material, computer-generated raw material codes, and the alarms and alerts if the operator would use the wrong grade, the wrong version, is absolutely amazing for being able to give that hechsher to a product.
Well, so basically the technology, which leads to efficiency, has been a big help. The computerization of much of what goes on in these factories has, I guess it obviates the chance of human error. It makes it not so likely, or not possible at all. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Oliver, for joining me. It was a pleasure. I think very informative. It's always for me personally to hear how complicated things can be behind the scenes is an unbelievable lesson. Just before we end, just to let everyone know that we hope, Ezras Hashem, our next webinar will be on Pesach-related issues, Pesach production, maybe kasher and kalim. So please send in any questions you have to marketing@kosher.org.au. Any topics, any Pesach-related topics you would like to see, please send that in. To remind everyone, our kosher book, our food guide, and the app are now at our offices. Please feel free to contact us, or we'll be contacting you about receiving a copy. Everyone have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.